Hello, everyone. Thank you. Thank you to the Art Fair team. Jaya, thank you for having us here. I'm very excited to see a full room, also nervous, also so embarrassing to listen to your own intro. You're like, wow. Anyway, thank you all for coming. The film was beautiful. It set a sort of context. I won't take too much time and we will go very quickly to our panelists. But I think this talk for me is very interesting because like our annual calendar is filled with like art shows and trade shows and biennales and the opening of galleries. This talk is interesting because I think it looks a little bit at the before the scenes, like the prelude to how art is made or how an artist lives or art before it becomes art, before it gets a gallery or a white cube space or a spotlight. So it's an interesting pause to just look at where do these residencies exist, how do they function, how organic or scripted or etc. they are. So we'll go ahead with that. And Mrs. Jindal, I want to come to you first. Last year at some point, and you mentioned your mother in the film as well, I was at the Kanori Art Center. The Bibi Doshi had just passed. It was just after that, and we were sitting at this office, and it had a window, and you could see the courtyard of the Kanori Art Center in Ahmedabad over there. And she was just casually, very unself-consciously telling me stories of the artists who've passed through this place, who have grown here, whose works have come out of here. And I was just thinking, this is history. You know, we were having chai and Gujarati snacks, and she was just talking, but it was so like insightful for me. And so this morning, when I was thinking about these questions, I was like, I want to ask you about your own sort of personal interest and intent for this. I assume you've grown up with it, but the music is quite distracting. Sorry about that, but please.
So, growing up, my mother had always wanted to do an art center in Ahmedabad. My mom's friend was B.V. Doshi, the architect, and there was this huge campus, the SEPT campus. Next to that is the Hati Singh Gallery and the Kanoria Center of Arts. And what is so important about these residences is that artists get a chance to have a studio and they get a time off and new artists then arrive. For example, Sudarshan Shetty, um, who else were there? Ravindra Reddy, Karl Antau, all of them was progressed at the Kanoria Center of Arts. So as I was in my childhood years, my dream of my mom was always there with me. And of course, my mom's vision is that I will also be a part of the Kanoria Center of Arts. And because of that, my dream for Hampi, I realized everything from the Kanoria Center of Arts. So I have some experience.
Also, I find Can you hear me? Um, and Tarini is doing so well now. I love what she's doing with Echo. So a little bit about the sort of intersection between personal passion and interest, then a cultural sort of context of where you're doing what, and then including art in it. Like it all comes together. It's come together for your mother, for Tarini. It's like it's a personal passion, isn't it?
Art and culture and heritage is our passion. I worked at the NCPA many years ago with Dr. Bhaba, and we have done the Art India magazine for 30 years. So I think it is ingrained in us. It is giving back for doing these kind of residences. We have no commercial interest in the arts besides passion. And the reason why we've done it in Hampi, because Hampi is an ancient land. It belongs to Sri Krishna Deva Raya, the largest kingdom in that region, and it is absolutely wonderful. Beautiful with rocks and riverine sunsets. So it could be an oasis for art and culture in Hampi, and that is why we decided to do an art center there. we decided to get Sameep Padora, who has done poetry and architecture, which many of you will see in Hampi for our Hampi Art Labs. So basically, it's just giving back to our art scene.
I mean, I want to add, like, I don't want to list the projects that JSW Foundation has done for sake of time in this forum, but my favorite is the David Sassoon Library because last year they restored it and it's just such a living monument now. And if I may plug in, you also patronize the Craftsmanship Prize that Architectural Digest does, and this is our 6th year and year after year, so thank you. Thank you. Sameep, if I may come to you next. I find that art, architecture, design, fashion, all creative pursuits are sort of come from the same source. And I guess traditionally in India, in any case, craftsmanship and makers were the culture. It could be a jewel or it could be a building. And the divisions are sort of Western modern, and for a reason, the categorization is interesting. But for you as a creator, let's forget architecture. For you as a creative person, what was the leap here? Like, all your work is very responsive to a site or a culture. But I want you to try and articulate for you as a maker, when this commission came to you, what was your initial instinct and thought and the eventual sort of response to it?
So I think one of the things that came to us straight away. I mean, it's impossible to go to this region and not be influenced by Tungabhadra, the buildings of Hampi, and there is, in some sense, there is no way for us to actually recreate that because there is a aspect of time that adds a kind of patina to space and form that only time can. Whatever we try and do is impossible. But the fact is that there is an ability to talk about context in a way that is not just about recreating an imagery. It is also about trying to find what lies in between, what is perhaps the essence that can also translate in many other ways. And for us, that process was really about trying to find that essence of the Tungabhadra, its landscape, the way the landscape is sculpted by the river. And in some sense, when we first started talking, Mr. Jindal told me it has to not just house art, it must be an art object in itself as well. And that's really where we were kind of taking these cues from.
And in terms of actual design interventions, because I work with an architectural magazine, my interest lies there. Can you give us an anecdote or some story of there are certain rooms and this is how we manage the light or the wind or something like that, the human experience of it?
So of course, I'll talk about the human experience, but one of the interesting things for us when we were doing the project is that how do you develop curved form structure, with frugal means to a certain extent, right? So the way that we did that was we actually cast all these curves by using earth as a way to develop the form and then using the earth as a formwork to cast over. So in some sense, even though the building is made out of cement, it's made from the earth. So the earth that comes from the same site that we worked on. So so that aspect was very interesting for me for the project. But what you'll also find when you actually look at the building, when I'm sure you'll visit at some point, is that the building, in some sense, while it stands out, it also disappears within the landscape. From a certain point of view, is a part of the landscape. And what we've been discussing as well through the project was there is no facility in the country or maybe in Asia that talks about art of scale, so land art. Where do you do that? And here, the building itself will become a kind of backdrop for producing that kind of work and installing that kind of work. So that's very kind of unique, I think, about the project.
No, and it's refreshing because most architecture these days is so it's there. It's like a big glass building and a concrete structure, and something that is so settled and it melts in with the landscape. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Ev, may I come to you next? Since we've spoken a little about, Mrs. Jindal spoke a little about the vision and the intent, and Sameep spoke about the actual physical structure, I wanted to ask you about the programming, the idea of what's going to come out of here. How are you looking at sort of integrating local culture with art practices? How are you thinking about the life that will be lived in this space?
Yeah, so, artist residencies are places where artists are nurtured. And what we've done here is we've created a platform where we nurture their practice. Like what you see here, let's say in the art fair, are finished work. I mean, you were touching upon that in the introduction. And this is really, to me, the tip of the iceberg. And, the entire process that comes before that and the unseen, the behind the scene is what happens in a residency. So we have, the process from conceptual ideas and thought process, research on materials and pigments and experimentation, then going into producing the works. And sometimes it takes months and months or years of research for artists to produce what we see today. So this is what we are going to support at Hampi Art Labs. And we benefit from an amazing surroundings of Hampi, the building Sameep conceived, which is like state of the art with all the facilities. We have workshops, like large studios and production workshops, all under the same roof, for ceramic, for printmaking, for audiovisual, 3D printing, and stone carving. We have access to the plant also. Hampi Art Labs is next to the JSW plant, which is the biggest in India. And more than having access to metal and to machines, we also have access to the engineers, the metallurgists, the structural engineers, and teams. There's a research and development office in the plant, and we're going to be working with them to help artists conceive works that, from really the initial 3D drawings, etc., till the production. And that is very unique. There are very few places in the world where, you have residencies that have these facilities for production. Then we benefit from the crafts and all the work that ECO has done in the past and the JSW has done as well. So, there has been already collaborations between craftsmen and contemporary designers and artists. So, the residency has opened 3 weeks ago. We have the first cohort of artists. They're already interacting with craftsmen and they've already started producing works. So then we have our global connections with our board and with our founders, Mrs. Jindal and Tarini. So, all the ingredients of a good residency are there. And I think what's also important is that, the vision of Mrs. Jindal to encourage creation and art making, and encourage, there is courage. And what we're giving is the space for artists to be courageous, to step out of their comfort zone, to experiment. Tarini was saying in the film, like we have that fluidity in the building, fluidity in the process of how we support also these residencies. There is no exhibition at the end. They don't have to produce something within a short time. We give them that time and space for them to really, deep dive in their practice and discover new materials, do new research, etc. So yeah, I think that's very exciting and
it sounds amazing.
Space.
Yeah, yeah. Before I go on to the next speaker, you've also worked abroad. You worked in Mumbai for a while. Is there a sort of cultural context to residencies in India versus, let's say, another country? Is there something specific or peculiarities of having an art residency in India?
Yeah, of course. So, artist residencies are essential to an art ecosystem anywhere in the world. And there are thousands of artist residencies. There's even a residency program in Antarctica. So on all continents, you have artist residencies. And what's happening in India is that we have very few. I was, after we had a discussion a few weeks back, I was looking at different programs, and I think there are about 25 programs currently in India, in big cities and outside. A city like New York has 70 programs in one city. We have 25 in the entire country. And out of 25, I think less than 5 have production facilities on site. So I think it's really needed to have more artist residencies. And I hope that the spotlight on Hampi is going to, show that unseen part of the industry and maybe inspire others to come forth and to support studio practices and support the artists more in that sense.
Thank you. Aaron, I think this is a good segue for you because I want to move away from Hampi as a case study for a moment. And from your experience at Delfina, I don't know for how many years, tell us a little about this whole the cultural impact of residencies, not just for the artist community. Like there is no border between art and culture in my view, but tell us a little about how significant or integral art residencies are?
Well, I'll go way, way, way back 4 decades ago when our organization was initially founded, also by a visionary woman patron of the arts. Her name was Delfina, so that's where the name Delfina Foundation comes from. And it's in our honor that we continue the legacy of 40 years. More than 1,000 artists have been supported in a very personal way through residencies at a time, even in the UK, when there wasn't this kind of support for young contemporary artists. So firstly, in terms of impact, you can grow an entire art scene through this no strings attached support by enabling process, by enabling opportunities, by enabling people's own personal growth. And that's what's really important when we talk about residencies. We're talking about both the professional development, but also the personal growth that comes through that, from being part of a community as residents, and then being situated within a community, your neighbors. And we talk a lot at Delfina about guests and host, and how this is a very fluid concept within our institution, but also within our neighborhood, and what it means to be a good neighbor, what it means to be a good guest, what it means to be a good host. The word host could go in two directions: hostility or hospitality. There's also an impact that residencies do in terms of self-power, in terms of a subtle kind of form of diplomacy, a way in which politics can never speak. Artists can enable those opportunities. Of course, artists don't want to necessarily be ambassadors for their country. They want to be hijacked by politics. But this soft power, this soft approach of building connections can change communities around us, can speak for those who sometimes kind of feel voiceless, but the kind of practices that are supported through residencies in a local way can amplify their voices to a global level. And that's what I think what we've seen kind of at Delfina Foundation. So our space is very different from Hampi. We're in the middle of London. We're a 2-minute walk from Buckingham Palace. We're in a house. It's a very domestic kind of context. So like Hampi Art Lab is building on its context and thinking about fluidity as a process, as an approach. We think about the domestic as an approach, about hospitality, about being a neighbor, about being a family, because a house feels that way. It has that kind of spirit. And what does it mean about being a family? It means that you have responsibilities to each other as a family. It means that, love it or like it, you're part of this network of individuals kind of for life. But it also means a certain kind of care and respect that you have for each other and for the environment around you. We are at the seat of power of a major European city that once was the head of an empire, that once was a very important part of the European Union. We have this very difficult history that we're also situated in as a house. And so our residencies are about hacking into, and maybe I'll also say a reverse form of extractivism that the colonial processes did, to bring artists, largely from the global south, to live next to the king and think. Sometimes make work, sometimes not, because that's, again, is not a focus for us, but to often think about what it means to sit there kind of in the center, and also think about the importance of the peripheral spaces, because the center is not that important, really, ultimately. But it's a place where people come to see, watch, kind of engage, and we have to kind of respect that the center can offer that. But for us, it's also about giving opportunity to those in the periphery, so that actually they understand also their power, their strength, and how much we need to learn so much from that. So from them. So going back to kind of the impact is also about valuing kind of local knowledge as it's brought from artists, international artists, to a new context, but also the knowledge that is there that artists can amplify. So in Hampi, that's going to happen as successive waves of artists become part of that community. That knowledge will be integrated into the institution. Again, going back, host and guests. You have to affect each side of it, and you have to be open to change as an institution when you're bringing in artists who have their own very particular approaches and processes. You can't be stagnant. And so the idea of fluidity here is really a key word in terms of thinking about the potential impact that Hampi Art Lab can make.
So interesting, domesticity and fluidity, and how the two, there are residencies, but in, they're mapped so differently. Sameep, if I may come back to you on that, this idea of fluidity, it's interesting. I mean, you're living there, you're working there, you're creating art, you're also creating yourself, and it's all very fluid. Did you think about it, or has this just naturally happened?
No, actually, it was a very conscious kind of discussion that came out of a number of interactions that we had when we were working on the project. And this notion of fluidity is something that started off from day one. In fact, you won't see images of the residential parts as well, which where artists will stay. But that area as well has that notion of fluidity. It has a sense of flow in the way spaces connect to each other. There are differences. Sorry. There are different scales of spaces where people can sit, talk to each other. That sense of community that was being talked about earlier exists very, very strongly. And fluidity is not just about movement; it's also about these moments of stasis, of repose that these spaces allow you to kind of experience.
Aaron, if I may go back to you 1 second, and I think Ev touched upon it a little. You talked about this idea of time and longevity. Like, we're so like, I want this and I want it tomorrow, or I want it now. But I would imagine an art residency, like Coach, for instance, like years and years of like lives have come out of there. So if you could speak a little about that.
In fact, I was just talking to Pooja about this kind of yesterday, and about her, 25 year or so tenure kind of at Coach, and being able to see not only just the growth of the institution, but the entire art scene kind of alongside that. Time is so important. And I think these kinds of initiatives, so Delfina Foundation, Hampi Art Lab, offering artists time without restrictions. When we, that's so important. When we do our kind of orientation at Delfina, we have 8 artists at a time who come into residency at least. And sometimes you have curators and sometimes collectors. There's so much anticipation, so much expectation for what they want to do. They're in London, they're so excited. And during my kind of like opening kind of like dialogue to them, I talk about the power of doing nothing. And the fact that as an artist, you can't ever stop doing something. You're always thinking, you're making work in your head before it comes reality kind of in your hands, right? You're always making work. And there's always so much pressure on artists to deliver, to make work. There'll be a fair, a biennale, your gallery needs work for this. There's a commission there. So I say to them to really respect the fact that they have this time that we fully fundraise them to be in London to think, and allow that time to expand the possibilities of what their thinking can achieve. Now, I've been at Delfina for 16 years, and so I've seen how we've offered artists those pockets of time to do nothing, and how it's become many different prize-winning, somethings along the way. The Venice Biennale list was kind of announced yesterday. There are 4 artists that are in the main exhibition that we've kind of presented or supported in some kind of way. There's another 11 representing different national pavilions, And for some of these artists, we gave them their very first residency. They wouldn't even have called themselves an artist yet. They were still maybe working full time. They didn't have their own practice. But we believed in them, that there was a possibility there for them to achieve something. And we gave them the space to take those risks. That's why it's almost important that it's called Hampi Art Lab. It's about that experimentation. It's about that risk taking, which is so important to not only development of individual artists, kind of like practice, but the development of the whole ecosystem. If we're not taking risks, you can't have the incredible works and installations that are kind of around us. I mean, I don't know if you guys seen Jatish Khalet's incredible installation kind of in the fair. It takes some kind of risk taking. Up until the last minute, there was risk that they were taking to get the work kind of installed, kind of on time. But I guess I just going back to say that time is really important in terms of process, and you have to allow and be generous and wait. Be patient, and sometimes it's frustrating, right? All of us who work in, supporting artists and particularly production, it can be very, very frustrating. But the rewards can be immense. When I look back at some of our alumni artists and what they've achieved kind of in the last kind of 16 years, I'm astounded. That's why I'm still there after 16 years, and 400 artists and 400 personalities and attitudes and problems. But also it's come with incredible opportunities and gifts, and I guess it's transformed my life in the process.
And just artists, working with artists. I want to come to you, Madhvi, because we've been speaking about this sort of larger overview cultural impact. I want to talk about the individual of you as an artist. Maybe tell us about some of the art residencies you've been through and what your personal experience was from it.
Well, so thank you very much to all the panelists for all the things you've said is exactly what, as an artist, I have gained from. One of the most important things was getting time away. That's number one. And then also allowing yourself to be influenced by whatever's coming. So going into a space like this was a residency I did in China, in Fuping, which is where the Xi'an soldiers are, the terracotta warriors. And we went in there. I had no idea what this residency was about, went in completely blank, and it turned out to be in a brick making factory. And so it in a little while, as I started working, I realized that there was these bricks that were being made 24/7, and they became my point of interest and my point of, so I took the brick as a material as well as my inspiration. I sliced them up and made them, deconstructed them and reconstructed them into organic sentinel beans like the terracotta warriors. So I think for me, it was really exciting to allow the space to influence me, give myself the time, allow myself to take the risk, because I had no idea what was happening, what would come out of it, and allowing that to have that dialogue. So all the kind of things you guys have talked about is exactly what I have experienced, and I feel that it has experienced my practice. So that was the residency in Fuping. And then the other residency I want to talk about is in India, in Maihar, which I went to in middle of the country. And again, coming from an urban background, although I'm so familiar with the cow dung, I hadn't quite looked at it. I came across it while I was driving into Madhya Pradesh, and I was thinking, oh my God, the materiality of the cow dung is so similar to the materiality of clay. And I started kind of getting mesmerized with the way the women were working with the cow dung. So I thought, why not work with that and combine, so that's how this work came about, where I sort of took a mold of the cow dung, and there was they have the handprints on the cow dung, which to me were very powerful, because that was the memory of the woman's hand, the anonymous woman who is working and laboring in the field. And I wanted to preserve those handprints. So I took a mold of her handprint and I made these works. And incidentally, I happened to be the curator of this residency, which was a huge risk I had taken. I'd invited 7 very well-known artists from around the world, from 7 countries, to come and work only for 10 days, because everybody had so little time. And the mandate was to make something really large in 10 days in ceramics. And so there was a risk, because I didn't know if these artists would get along. It was a risk. Can we actually do anything? Build this kiln, make this work? And it was just phenomenal what came out of it. These are images from So as a co-curator of the Indian Ceramic Triennale, we also give platform not just to the artists to show their works and experiment and explore, but we also provide residencies. And one of the residency was this Korean artist in our last Triennale who responded to Jaipur. So we kind of have that sort of ability where we provide the platform and then we see that artists usually generally respond to the space. So I'm quite sure that in Hampi we are going to see a lot of wonderful things that come out of the geography of Hampi. We also have in our current Triennale, we have, this is a little video, so you'll hear the sound. This is a this is a interaction of sound and ceramic. And when we were getting these artists, we, as curators, decided that we would allow them to have, provide a residency space for them to interact with Gattam makers and Gattam player. And so it's really quite interesting. We actually don't know what's come out of that. All we know is that the artists are super excited with their interaction, and we are super excited of having taken this risk and as well as provided a platform. So I'm quite sure that Hampi Art Labs is going to be doing just that for so many people, and I'm so proud to be associated with them.
Thank you. Thank you. That was interesting. The Hampi Art Labs is opening on the 5th, am I right? And to the public on the 6th. So let us all make a trip. If there are any questions from the audience, or if anybody from here would like to make any last notes, points, any questions?
We're going to have 8 artists,
Okay.
and there will be a duration for 3 months.
Okay.
And there are studios, the basic studios are there, but we are going to have a very large studio for, for bigger production, which is not available in India. A lot of the artists go to China for their production facilities. Now we are getting the machine in India for the art.
And there'll be some selection criteria for these.
We have a
8?
jury. These are the people here in the jury. This is the jury basically, and we also have Abhay is also there, who's our editor of Art India. So there are a lot of people who have given us applications, and we choose 8.
All right.
And I believe that the Vijayanagar steel plant is close by. So is that like, a workshop where people can...
Yeah, we have the largest steel plant in India. So there's welding, scrap, everything is available there. We also have a cement plant and a paint plant. So the sky's the limit. Next to that is Hampi, where there's granite, there's clay. We have a kiln, ceramic kiln. We also have a handloom school there. We also have plastic recycling facilities. So we have, as I said,
The options
all
are
the
like-
resources are there.
Yeah.
It's for the artists to decide what and how and where they want it.
Anyone else?
Hi. Hampi Art Labs just seems like a dream for any artist in terms of the space, the studio, the landscape, the equipment. My question is, and also for Delfina, do you consider an artist's personal development in this process? Simple things like their CV, how to write about their work, concept notes, or even reviewing contracts with galleries, making sure they don't fall into a a little bit of a danger with committing to commissions and things like that. So is that a consideration at Delfina, and is that something that Hampi Art Labs are also going to help with?
We will definitely develop the curriculum of the artists. We have Meera Karam. Meera, come. She is the director of Hampi Art Labs, and she's going to stay in Hampi. Neera, would you like to say one?
Hello. Yeah, I think one of the things what we would like to do is mentorship for the artists, even with how do you apply for a residency, how do you write a concept note, how do you develop your profile. So here we have space for personal development and creative practice, also networking. So that's how we are not really looking at one piece of artwork, but looking at something which is more meaningful for a creative practice.
And just to go ahead and answer from the perspective of Delfina, well, generally, I think residencies offer an opportunity for kind of peer-to-peer kind of engagement, whereby if you go to art school, right, you learn how to make art, but you don't learn how to be an artist. And that's what kind of a residency can enable you to do by talking to colleagues, but also seeing artists in different contexts. Now, along the way, we certainly, in terms of applying for a residency, we have done residency kind of workshops, application workshops before, but we're always very, I'd say, lenient and generous when we're reviewing applications, knowing that artists are coming from very different contexts, and a CV can take on many different kind of forms and shapes, and sometimes artists don't have the resources to document their work really nicely, so the portfolio might be very weak in terms of how it's documented, but we're looking beyond that, kind of at the work itself. And we do always try and talk one-on-one kind of with artists at the later stage of the interview process and to get to know them kind of as a person. But I think the personal development is, I would say, at the core of what we do, probably more than a professional. And there's a focus on that, but the personal, because in order to get the professional, you have to get the person right, right? It's like if you want to be a therapist or like a child psychiatrist, you got to get yourself sorted before you can actually work. So we are thinking about actually the nature kind of the artists, kind of like themselves.
We will also have visiting curators who will come to work with the artists.
And same at Delfina, yeah.
And some exposure visits for the artists.
And last, I'll just add that we work a lot with partners too. So quite a number of our residencies are with other institutions in London or around the world, and some of their fellowships for like maybe more kind of senior curators or even artists where they might be creating works with institutions like the Victoria and Albert Museum or even smaller spaces. And so the nature of partnerships are also for us built around the idea of personal and professional development of practitioners.
If there are no more questions, I would just like to thank you all for being here. Thank you, Mrs. Jindal. It's a beautiful gift to the community and everybody who's part of it. Thank you to the Art Fair team for having us, for giving us this moment, and to all of you for showing up and sitting through it.